Yes, Mr. Netanyahu. Yes, thank you for calling. The plan is going perfectly. Yes, they are buying it all nicely. Oh, yes, I received the check. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ooh, an added bonus. Okay. I will be sure to take that in consideration today. I'm going to unmute my microphone now. All right, all right, all right. We are back. Let's get a little window capture happening here, shall we? Oh, I don't need that window. There we go. Need this window. I do now have YouTube Premium. I figured it out. I needed to use a Mexican credit card because I am in Mexico. I need to just like get this behind my video capture. Maybe it's better to just bring my video capture higher. I don't know. That was the wrong video capture. Well, welcome, welcome. Happy Friday evening for those of you who are celebrating your weekly Friday evening. For those of you who aren't, you're dead to me. You're in a time zone that doesn't matter. Yeah. Well, this is going to be part 2 of diving into this conversation. We already found a fair amount of misinfo in this one. So we'll see what else we'll find. Misinformation is, of course, not necessarily disinformation. We'll do that. We should have something up here, maybe like upcoming Pangburn events. I'll eventually sort that out. But yes, we are so cool now. We are functioning while using YouTube Premium. Solving politics. Welcome. Welcome. Says, tell them if there was no Islam, there would be nobody dead in Gaza. USA would not have had to fight 9 wars. Always, quote, one up your adversary. I'm not sure what all that means, but I'm glad you're here. I want. What do I want? Okay, that's good. All I ever wanted, all I ever needed. Now I just need to make sure we are in the right spot. So let me open up my systems. This should be its own window. Get our stuff rolling here. How is everyone? Give me a rating in the chat between 1 and 10 with regards to your own well-being today. 1 being awful, the worst, 10 being the best, great. I had a fantastic day with my family, with my children. Just going to make sure I grab the right stuff here. Yeah, we've already adjudicated a lot of claims here in this video. This is what I want, right? Yes, it is. Let's grab that, make it nice and big. How far did we make it? Let's go back to 35 minutes here. I want to make sure we're exhaustive.
To solve the Gaza question.
Yeah.
And solving the Gaza question was very clear. They were very clear about from day one. They were going to, instead of mow the lawn, they were going to extirpate. For your listeners, extirpate is the fancy word for pull out by the roots.
Yeah.
They were going to extirpate every blade of grass in Gaza. And that meant including the 1.1 million children. And that was their goal. And then their means, their method
need to go to 50.
Of carrying out this
need to go here.
Sexual violence happens. No reason to assume that it didn't happen here. So, like you...
That was my initial assessment as well.
So, like you, I agreed on that point at the beginning. I didn't accept it, but I saw it as a plausible possibility that I had to be open to. Number two, you're absolutely correct. In the big picture, listen, we all agree killing people is worse than raping them. That should be pretty obvious. As a crime, murder ranks higher than rape. Now, some people say don't rank them. No, we always rank them. That's why we have homicide, murder, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder. We're always making hierarchies of crimes. We have misdemeanors. If 1,200 people were killed, that's horrible enough. It's not going to change the big picture if rape and sexual violence happen.
Yes, it does change the big picture. What is he talking about? I mean, this is just an ethical disagreement, but obviously it matters if someone was raped before they killed them, or their corpse was raped after they were killed or murdered. What the hell is he talking about? Of course that weighs into the big picture. That is insane. I have to listen to this again.
As a plausible possibility that I had to be open to. Number two, you're absolutely...
A plausible possibility? Oh my, what did I just click on? So the realm of possibility is seemingly infinite, right? When we look at classical logic, there really is no way to actually demonstrate something to be impossible. Because at the end of the day, what you're going to do, like with something as concrete as the logical absolutes, let's say, you're going to be like, we've never been able to even begin thinking about a way how this could be wrong. So that's why it's impossible for it to be wrong. And then someone will ask, well, is it at least possible that like an advanced alien could visit Earth tomorrow and you know, they're so advanced, they're 100 million years more advanced than us, and they're like, yeah, I know you think you have found like an incontrovertible truth, something like a true dogma that is actually absolutely certain, that, but then the advanced alien says, I wish I could show you how you were wrong, but your ape brain cannot handle the kind of information. But, you know, trust me, human, that is not incontrovertibly true. Like, let's say the logical absolutes. Now, if you grant that that's possible, then the game's already over. But if you say that that's impossible, and then I ask you, why do you believe that that particular scenario is impossible? The person tends to, or seemingly needs to keep leaning back on like their inability to imagine how an alien could an advanced alien could point something out, or their inability or humanity's inability to imagine a contradiction to the logical absolutes. But of course, that doesn't mean that we can't imagine it tomorrow, that some miraculous possible thing could happen tomorrow. Just the logical point is that, and this gets, it boils down to the argument from incredulity fallacy. That's what all of this is about. So if anyone ever, so I just wanted to like make that statement about possibility and the realm of modal possibility. Possibility ought not weigh into your epistemic standards. Plausibility should, for the reason I just outlined with regards to possibility. And plausibility deals with things that are likely to be the case by the standards of logic or rigorous epistemic standards. So that it's just weird when someone says plausibly possible. That's really a low resolution thing to say.
Absolutely correct. In the big picture, listen, we all agree killing people is worse than raping them. That should be.
I do agree with that statement. Yes, killing people is worse than raping them. People, it's and that should not be taken to diminish the act of rape, right? Not at all. But it's just like, obviously, like, rape victims have the opportunity, have the chance to go on and seek the mental health care, the physical health care, the social health care that they require to hopefully overcome the horribly traumatic event of the rape. And even if they don't overcome it, learn how to, in a healthy way, express that pain throughout their life, and they still get to have a life. They still get to pursue a life. They didn't choose to be, raped or murdered. So they still have that opportunity. But if there's if someone is just murdered, then the opportunity is completely taken away from them. And I personally know, just in my own life, a handful of people who were victims of rape who, have gone on to live beautiful lives, have beautiful families, and but that doesn't diminish the act of rape. So let's listen to this one more time, because what I thought I heard the first time was a troubling thing to hear as a moral well-beingist. It's gonna move this up. Hopefully we did not hear what we just heard.
Pretty obvious. As a crime, murder ranks higher than rape. Now, some people say don't rank them. No, we always rank them. That's why we have homicide, murder, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder. We're always making hierarchies of crimes. We have misdemeanors. If 1,200 people were killed, that's horrible enough. It's not going to change the big picture if rape and sexual violence happen.
What? It's not going to change the big picture if rape or sexual violence happened. And Hasan says yep to this and is just nodding along. This is abhorrent. That's a very scary thing to say. Of course it matters. Of course it changes the big picture. Just because they were murdered, all of a sudden those lesser crimes in this hierarchy don't matter? Of course they matter. If they killed 100 dogs while they were, mutilating, attacking, and raping people and murdering them on October 7th, that matters. It's not like the lesser crime like doesn't need to be mentioned or is somehow diminished by the the more serious crime. Like, what is this?
It's wrong, it's terrible, but the big picture was horrible enough, which actually raised a very interesting question. The interesting question is, if it didn't happen, why did Israel make that their litmus test? That's where they threw down the gauntlet. You had to agree that sexual violence, including rape, happened, or you became the equivalent of a Holocaust denier. And it was an interesting question. Why did you make that your red line? There were so many other red lines, killing children.
I don't think that was the red line. Killing children was also bad.
And all sorts of other, pretty terrible things happened October 7th. Why did they make that the red line? And
why does he believe that that was the red line? I don't see any good reason to believe that that was a collective red line or they, quote unquote, made that the red line.
That brings us to the next question. Why did they make a red?
So this is a bit of propaganda right here. Speaking of they as a collective and saying that they made it the red line. Where's the demonstration that this was made the red line? And Hasan's just, head shaking in agreement along with it.
Red line of something that didn't happen. That to me is a point of reflection. If you look at the record, and I've gone through it as closely as possible, if you look at the record, what do we know? Let's start with the basics. There's no forensic evidence of rape. Now, Israel had a plausible explanation of that. The plausible explanation was they weren't prepared for a crime of this magnitude, 1,200 corpses. And so they processed the bodies very quickly to prepare for the ritual death, the ritual burying.
Yeah.
Okay? They didn't preserve any bodily fluids and any other signs that a rape had occurred. I don't know if it's true or not, but I would say it's certainly plausible. So I was willing to set aside the absence of any forensic evidence of rape. So now you have no forensic evidence of rape. That's going to leave for material evidence. We'll leave witnesses aside for a moment. Material evidence. There's no Pramila Patten, who was the UN special envoy, she says very late in her report, she says, no medical legal evidence of rape. And then that brings us to the second material evidence of rape, and that is digital evidence. Now, digital evidence is a very interesting case. So listen up. The most recent report that came out by an Israeli, Dr. Elkayim Levy, she says we have 10,000 photographs and digital segments from October 7th. 10,000. She also says it would take 1,800 hours to go through all of that digital and photographic evidence from October 7th. Now, if you do the simple calculation, which I did, and I was going over it in my mind last night to make sure for your show I don't get it wrong. You know, if you were a single researcher and you were working 8 hours a day, every day of the week, including weekends, do you know how long it would take you to go through all of that digital evidence?
What up, everyone? Welcome, welcome. Make sure you smash that like button when you get into the room. We've started off pretty heavy here with some insane claims, some insane ethics being practiced and articulated by Finkelstein and seemingly agreed to by Hasan Piker. The idea that like murder is bad enough and that the lesser crimes of rape doesn't add or matter to the greater picture. That is insane. That is insanity. that idea. And this is being signaled out to 1.92 million subscribers on Hasan's channel. Wowzers. So I'm going to get all of the evidence together here. So first off, let's deal with the more qualified claim here, the claim that there is no forensic or medico-legal evidence of rape on October 7th. So the evidence base had major forensic limitations, including crime scene disruption and scarce direct survivor testimony. But UN investigations found reasonable grounds for rape/gang rape in several locations and clear and convincing information regarding hostage sexual violence. Quote, no evidence is, of course, too broad. The forensic record had major limitations, but UN investigators found reasonable grounds for rape and gang rape at several locations and clear and convincing information concerning hostage sexual violence. Quote, no evidence is too broad. So I am going to pull up all of the relevant information related to the UN investigations regarding rape. I think I'm supposed to be saying grape on YouTube. Mayflower says, let's talk about IDF doing grape. Why? We're talking about this right now. Why don't we deal with this particular fact check? In my fact check of Dave Farina's propaganda hit piece that I just did, basically a week's worth of work on, there wasn't any denial on my part with regards to that fact checking that there has been crimes demonstrated, sexual crimes of a sexual nature, and that can be of course labeled rape on behalf of the IDF and the Israel side of this conflict. So I went through all of that. But Mayflower Kid, do you know what whataboutism is? Whataboutism is basically what you just did. Like, what about IDF doing grape? Well, we're not talking about the IDF right now in this episode. What do you think about what I just read about Hamas doing rape on October 7th? What do you think about that? I'll be interested to see if you write down your opinion on this particular issue. Let me just fill up my water. I will be right back. Make sure you smash that like button when you get in. Say hi in the chat. Let's get that chat rolling and pumping. Let's see if Mayflower Kid says anything regarding Hamas's crimes. if you can't stomach, saying that Hamas rape is bad, then this fact check process done by a moral well-beingist like myself is exactly what you need. I'll have a whole bunch of information to read here in just a second.
Mind last night to make sure for your show I don't get it wrong. You know, if you were a single researcher and you were working 8 hours a day, every day of the week, including weekends, you know how long it would take you to go through all of that digital evidence?
How long?
More than 7 months. And it was a very confined area. It was the Gaza envelope.
All right. And for the record, Mayflower Kid said, I already said it's a crime against humanity. Hedonic, thank you so much for the $5 super chat. I will read out and respond or investigate any super chat. So keep that in mind. It goes to a great cause. Someone said, let us not forget Hasan shocked his dog and is lying about it in a very Trump-like way. Since you brought it up, I will investigate it. That whole shock dog thing, I think it was, where was I with Stephen Bonnell, Destiny? We were at some point of the anti-Trump debate tour, and I remember when that whole dog shock thing started. But I'm going to, of course, fact check this. And what I'm going to see is that if this whole shocking the dog thing is just simply conspiratorial. And if it is simply conspiratorial and we don't have good reason to believe that it is the case, we shouldn't be believing it. Oh yeah, there's a lot of information to go through here with regards to the UN investigation of rape by Hamas. Thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Love, love. Someone said Loner Box did the work. Check it out. Well, I checked out Loner Box, and I did like I think it was a 20-minute segment, just reviewing his reactions and reviews and his process. He's got a lot of flaws in his process, so I will I'll check it out myself, and you can see who's got a higher resolution picture of the actual facts of that situation. I don't really trust others in general doing good fact checking. It really does take your moral quest, your moral principles, your moral purposes are up here, and your politics are down here. It's not that there's not a relationship between your highest ethical purposes, like my moral quest is to maximize well-being for myself and those around me. That trumps, sorry for saying Trump, all the politics. The thing that guides my politics is that thing up here. And I must have a high resolution, clear, factual picture of what is going on in reality if my moral prescriptions based on well-being, physical, mental, and social health are to be directed accurately based on what's actually going on. Okay. So Finkelstein is saying there's no forensic evidence of rape. He then offers Israel's explanation. Authorities were dealing with roughly 1,200 bodies, prioritized rapid identification and burial, and consequently did not preserve bodily fluids or other potential signs of grape. He says he finds that explanation plausible enough to, quote, set aside the absence of forensic evidence. He then says, so now you have no forensic evidence of grape. And around where we were just watching in the video, around 55 minutes, referring to UN Special Representative Pramila Patten, quote, she says, no medical legal evidence of grape. That is followed by his discussion of digital evidence. Later, however, he goes substantially further and argues that the absence of the kinds of evidence he expects implies that the alleged sexual violence did not happen. So let's look at a few of these propositions, and let's look at the verdict. So the proposition from Finkelstein, there was essentially no preserved forensic evidence establishing grape from the October 7th crime scenes. This is supported with the scope clarification. Patten found no medical legal evidence of grape. This is supported in substance, but his paraphrase is slightly broader than Patten's exact wording. Israeli evidence collection was badly compromised by rapid recovery burial, mass casualties, and untrained responders. This is supported. There was no publicly located digital footage specifically depicting grape. This is largely supported for the material Patten reviewed. An absolute claim about every existing file is seemingly unprovable. Then he goes on to say, therefore, rape or sexual violence did not happen. That's false. And this is an evidentially invalid inference. Rape on October 7th has been established by conventional DNA, semen, rape kit, or autopsy evidence. Not established by the major independent investigations review. So that's not true. At least it hasn't been demonstrated. There is substantial non-forensic evidence that sexual violence occurred. That is supported. There is meaningful evidence specifically of rape. Yes, but with important evidentiary limitations. Hamas leadership ordered grape as a policy. That's not established by the strongest independent evidence. And sexual violence against some hostages occurred. This is strongly supported. So what does the forensic record actually show? The June 2024 UN Independent Commission of Inquiry explicitly stated, quote, the commission notes the absence of forensic evidence of sexual crimes committed on the 7th of October. The commission explained why Israeli authorities prioritized identifying and burying the very large number of dead. As a result, evidence potentially useful for later criminal accountability was often not collected or preserved. The commission also said it had been unable to meet any October 7th sexual violence survivors despite trying. I really hope Israel has learned from this horrible mistake. This, prioritization of identifying and burying the very large number of dead. I don't know what their process is, but I wonder if exhumation, I'm sure they've thought about this, but if exhumation would help, and if any evidence could be collected from that process. Pramila Paten's earlier UN mission reached essentially the same conclusion about the condition of the forensic record. Her team reported limited survivor and witness testimony, limited forensic evidence. I thought there was no forensic evidence. Numerous dispersed crime scenes, ongoing hostilities, first responders who were understandably focused on rescue and body recovery rather than sexual crime evidence preservation. That's got to change. This needs to be in the public consciousness, and law enforcement and, military should have known better to intervene there. Interventions by inadequately trained volunteers, big problem there. Bodies that had been badly burned, and rapid identification and burial procedures. The report says the absence of comprehensive forensic evidence limited the team's ability to draw definitive forensic conclusions. So if by, quote, forensic evidence, we mean things like rape kit examination, semen or bodily fluid recovery, DNA linkage, genital swabs, contemporaneous medical examination of living victims, autopsy findings demonstrating penetration, preserved biological traces attributable to a perpetrator, then the evidence from October 7th is extraordinarily weak or absent. Of course, we need to acknowledge that truth, at least what's been demonstrated so far. Remember, all of your commitments to truth claims, your commitments to what you believe to be facts, should all be provisional. Said in a different way would mean it should all be open to update. That's a necessary constraint on epistemology in my philosophy. This is born of fallibilism as a virtue. Like, you can achieve knowledge without any mention of certainty. And we, of course, should, by way of Bayesian reasoning, be updating our beliefs as new evidence comes to light. Finkelstein's, quote, "they didn't preserve bodily fluids" statement. The core is supported, but the absolute wording is a little too categorical. The UN reports established that forensic collection was severely deficient and potentially valuable evidence was lost. They do not establish that literally no bodily fluid, DNA sample, or relevant biological material whatsoever was preserved anywhere by any Israeli authority. So, quote, well, Israeli authorities failed to systematically preserve the biological and forensic evidence one would normally seek in a rape investigation. That is supported and demonstrated. But not one relevant biological sample was preserved anywhere. That's not established. What did Pramila Paten actually say about medico-legal evidence? This is particularly important because Finkelstein's quotation is surprisingly close to the UN report. Paten's team included a forensic pathologist. It reviewed more than 5,000 photographs and approximately 50 hours of video, including material from militants' body cameras, dash cams, CCTV, traffic cameras, individual phones, body recovery footage, and the identification process. The mission also visited attack locations and Israeli forensic institutions. In its medico-legal assessment, the report said that no tangible indications of rape could be identified from the available photographs and videos. That matters. It means Finkelstein's paraphrase, quote, Paten says no medical legal evidence of rape, is substantially grounded in the actual report. But it isn't perfectly precise. Paten did not say there is no evidence that rape occurred. She said that the medical legal examination of the photographic video material did not yield tangible indication sufficient to establish rape. And the report immediately stresses an elementary forensic point. Rape may leave no visible injury, particularly when there has been no proper examination of the victim. Consequently, the absence of identifiable injury in photographs cannot rule rape out. I should have said grape. So the best characterization is Finkelstein correctly identifies the absence of affirmative medical legal findings of grape, but he later misuses that absence as evidence of non-occurrence. What about digital evidence? What up, everyone? Make sure you smash that like button when you get into the room. I really appreciate it. We are fact-checking Hasan, Piker, and Norm Finkelstein on Israel-Palestine. This is the second episode. This will eventually be compiled into an extensive report like you saw for the Dave Farina fact-check video. What about digital evidence? Patton's finding is also much more nuanced than some public discussion suggests. Her mission reviewed those thousands of images and approximately 50 hours of footage. It did not locate open source digital evidence specifically depicting the act of sexual violence itself. That substantially supports Finkelstein's point that despite the enormous quantity of October 7th video, there was no identified Hamas body cam video plainly showing a completed rape in the evidence Patton reviewed. But two qualifications matter. First, Patton did not find such a video. So first, quote, Patton did not find such a video is not the same proposition as, quote, no such file exists anywhere. The total universe of Israeli intelligence, police evidence, seized phones, deleted media, and non-public files is not independently searchable. Second, digital evidence can be relevant without literally filming penetration. Patton's team found photographs, video showing fully or partially naked victims, some naked from the waist down, bound wrists or legs, unusual positioning, and bodies displaying combinations of restraints, undressing, and violent death. Those are potentially circumstantial indicators of sexual violence, though none individually demonstrate rape. This means the proper statement is no publicly established perpetrator video showing a completed rape was identified by the UN mission, but other digital material contributed circumstantial evidence of sexual violence. This is very different from saying, quote, 10,000 pictures and no rape video, therefore rape didn't happen. If there was no conventional forensic evidence, what evidence led Patton to conclude rape probably occurred? Primarily witness evidence plus circumstantial evidence assessed location by location. Patton used the UN's, quote, reasonable grounds to believe standard. This is a genuine evidentiary threshold, but it is much lower than proof beyond reasonable doubt at a criminal trial. The mission did not claim the mission did not claim that it had criminally proven individual rape cases. Nova Festival and surrounding area. Patton's mission concluded there were reasonable grounds to believe multiple incidents of rape and or gang rape occurred at and around Nova. The report relied on credible source accounts describing sexual assaults in which victims were reportedly raped and then killed or killed during the assault. It also encountered accounts of apparent post-mortem rape and circumstantial evidence involving naked or partially naked bodies, restraints, and violent death. This is substantial testimonial circumstantial evidence. But because the victims in the relevant accounts were generally dead, there was no victim interview, no grape kit, no perpetrator identification through DNA, and usually no forensic confirmation of penetration. The distinction is essential. Road 232. Patton reported credible information based on corroborating witness accounts concerning the grape of 2 women by armed attackers. Other reported grapes along Road 232 could not be verified within the mission's timeframe. The mission also observed the reoccurring pattern of bound, naked, or partially naked corpses. So the correct description is not, quote, UN investigators forensically proved grape on Road 232. It is UN investigators considered corroborating witness evidence sufficiently credible to meet a reasonable grounds threshold. Kibbutz Raim. The mission reported that it verified an incident of the grape of a woman outside a bomb shelter, while other grape reports remained unverified. Again, quote, verified here is the technical mission's evidentiary judgment. It does not mean a perpetrator was convinced or that DNA evidence exists. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being with me tonight. Patton also disproved allegations. This is extremely important because it demonstrates that the UN mission did not simply accept Israeli allegations wholesale. At Kibbutz Be'eri, it determined that at least 2 widely circulated allegations were unfounded. One was the gruesome story of a pregnant woman's abdomen had been cut open and her fetus stabbed. Another widely publicized sexual violence account was also rejected after the team reconstructed the scene and obtained superseding information. Other crimes of objects being inserted into women's genitals could not be verified because the available imagery was inadequate. At Kfar Aza, the mission could not verify a reported grape, although some circumstantial evidence suggested that some form of sexual violence may have occurred. At the Nahal Oz military base, it could not verify either a reported grape or an alleged genital mutilation case. Forensic review found injuries involving intimate areas, but no discernible pattern of targeted genital mutilation. This cuts in 2 directions. It supports Finkelstein when he argues that some sensational atrocity stories were false or inadequately substantiated, but it weakens his allegation that Patton simply manufactured or rubber-stamped a predetermined grape narrative. A report that expressly rejects prominent allegations and reportedly says, quote, could not verify, is behaving much more cautiously than that characterization implies, by Finkelstein. The later UN Commission of Inquiry was even more cautious about grape. This is one of the strongest pieces of evidence in Finkelstein's favor and deserves much greater prominence in this particular fact-checking report. The Independent Commission of Inquiry later stated explicitly that there was an absence of forensic evidence of sexual crimes from October 7th. The commission nevertheless documented evidence of sexual violence more broadly at several locations based on credible witness testimony, photographs and video, partial or full nudity, restraint, exposure of genital regions, positioning of bodies, and other contextual indicators. But when it came specifically to grape, the commission was more reserved than Patton. Access limitations prevented it from independently verifying some grape allegations to its satisfaction. That is not necessarily contradictory quote, sexual violence encompasses many acts besides rape. The commission also did not establish that Hamas commanders issued instructions to rape. It requested information concerning possible orders and did not receive evidence sufficient to establish such a command policy. This is a critical firewall. Evidence that individual rapes or sexual assaults occurred is not equal to evidence that Hamas leadership ordered rape as an operational policy. Those propositions should never be merged. The evidence became stronger after the 2024 UN investigations. This is where a 2026 fact check must improve on arguments frozen in early 2024. In December 2025, Amnesty International released an extraordinarily detailed 173-page investigation of the October 7th attacks and hostage treatment. Unlike the early UN missions, Amnesty did interview a person who said he personally survived rape on October 7th. The anonymous man, identified publicly by the Hebrew initial Dalet, said armed men of Nova at the Nova site pinned him down, stripped him, touched his genitals, and raped him. Amnesty interviewed him directly, interviewed his lawyer, and reviewed medical records. His lawyer told Amnesty that he accompanied Dalet to police in June 2024 to report the assault, and again the following month. That is direct testimonial evidence of rape. It is not the same as forensic confirmation. His medical records were reviewed much later and support the fact that he had reported the assault. They are not an October 7th rape kit proving penetration or identifying a perpetrator. But after the evidence emerged, the proposition, quote, there has never been a first-person rape survivor account, became false, because now they had one. Amnesty found additional corroborating evidence, but remained remarkably cautious. Amnesty also interviewed an experienced sexual violence therapist who said she had provided intensive treatment to 3 rape survivors from the October 7th attacks, involving incidents at Nova and Kibbutzim, and, according to the therapist, multiple perpetrators. Amnesty further documented a second Amnesty further documented a second publicly reported rape allegation, 5 named people who said they witnessed rape, 5 people who reported hearing what they interpreted as sexual assault, 3 additional mental health professionals whose organizations treated at least 13 clients reporting that they had witnessed rape or other sexual assault. Amnesty specifically warns that there may be overlap among some of these secondary accounts, so they should not simply be added together as independent cases. This is exactly the kind of denominator discipline our analysis should use. Most importantly, Amnesty's final conclusion was more cautious than many media summaries. It said, Amnesty International collected evidence that indicated that rape was likely committed. During October 7th. But Amnesty then said it did not consider that it had collected enough evidence to definitively conclude that rape, as distinct from sexual assault more broadly, was committed. That is an exceptionally important nuance. So by late 2025, the evidentiary situation was direct rape allegation plus therapist corroboration of other survivors plus witness evidence plus circumstantial evidence equals rape likely. But Amnesty still declined to say rape definitively proven as an institutional fact. That substantially raises the credibility of Amnesty's assessment because it shows an explicit refusal to outrun the evidence. Sexual assault is better established than rape specifically. Amnesty reaches a firmer conclusion regarding sexual assault broadly. It says it documented evidence that Palestinian assailants committed sexual assault during the October 7th attacks. For example, former hostage Ilana Gritzowski described being beaten and sexually touched while abducted from near Oz. She said she lost consciousness during the assault and regained consciousness in Gaza, partially naked. Amnesty reviewed the account and additional corroborating material. This establishes why the proposition, quote, "there is no evidence of sexual violence on October 7th," is clearly false. The much narrower proposition, "there is no preserved forensic evidence proving rape," is substantially true. Those two sentences should sound similar rhetorically, but are completely different evidentiary claims. So again, one more time. Quote, "there is no evidence of sexual violence on October 7th" is clearly false based on what's been demonstrated. The much narrower proposition, "there is no preserved forensic evidence proving rape," is substantially true based on what's been demonstrated. Let's not confuse those things. Very important not to confuse those things. What up, everyone? Make sure you smash that like button, share the stream on your social media accounts if you find this valuable, and I will respond to all and any super chats. Thank you. Let's look at sexual violence against hostages in a separate and considerably stronger case. We also need to stop mixing rape during the October 7th assault in Israel and sexual violence during subsequent captivity in Gaza. Patton found, quote, "clear and convincing information that some hostages had been subjected to conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and sexualized torture or cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment." Quote, "clear and convincing information was deliberately higher threshold than the, quote, reasonable grounds standard applied to the event day findings." Part of the hostage evidence consisted of first-person accounts from released hostages rather than solely inference from corpses. Amnesty's later investigation likewise concluded that some captives were subjected to physical and sexual violence. So, evidence that some hostages experienced sexual violence is considerably stronger than the evidence available for individual completed rapes during the October 7th attack itself. That should be stated explicitly. Did the ICC find sexual violence? Yes, but this too requires the legal stage firewall. When the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Hamas military commander Mohammed Daif in November 2024, the pretrial chamber found reasonable grounds to believe he bore responsibility for crimes including rape and other forms of sexual violence, covering conduct from at least October 7th onward. This is significant corroboration, but an ICC arrest warrant is not a conviction, and the public record does not expose all the underlying evidentiary material. Amnesty noted the warrant in its own review. We should therefore say ICC judges found sufficient grounds for a warrant involving rape, sexual violence allegations, not the ICC proved Hamas committed rape. What about claims that rape was, quote, systematic or a weapon of war? This needs much more caution than is often shown. The major independent investigations establish a significant factual basis for sexual violence, but they have not established through publicly available command evidence that Hamas's leadership ordered fighters to grape civilians. Amnesty states directly, it found no evidence that Hamas or other Palestinian armed groups gave orders to their fighters to commit sexual violence during the attack. That does not prove there were no orders. It means Amnesty did not find evidence for them. The UN Commission likewise did not establish a grape order command structure. An Israeli academic/legal initiative, the DINA project, and the more recent Civil Commission on October 7th, Crimes Against Women and Children, have argued that the repetition and geographic distribution of sexual violence demonstrate a systematic operational method. The 2026 Civil Commission explicitly characterizes sexual violence as widespread, systematic, and integral to the attacks. Those reports deserve consideration, but their evidentiary weight is different from an independent UN commission. Amnesty investigated, but their evidentiary weight is different from an independent UN commission, amnesty investigation, or criminal judgment. They are Israeli-led initiatives undertaking advocacy and legal documentation, and some underlying material cannot be independently inspected publicly. Therefore, as of August 2026, quote, sexual violence occurred at multiple locations is supported. Quote, rape likely occurred, supported by the balance of evidence. Quote, rape was definitively proven through forensic evidence. That would be false. Quote, Hamas leadership ordered systematic rape as a weapon of war, not established by the strongest independent public evidence. And I'll take this moment to remind everyone that just because things haven't been established yet, or the things that doesn't mean that they won't be established later. This is why we must epistemically remain open to update, open to new evidence that might be presented. And some things that we believe now to be fact, some things we believe now to be demonstrated, might be countered by counterfactuals, counter evidence. Let's say when the ICJ perhaps starts doing their full trial or investigation relating to war crimes, etc. Evidence that should make us skeptical of individual atrocity claims. There genuinely was misinformation after October 7th. Patton herself rejected prominent allegations. The later commission and Amnesty also found problematic accounts. Amnesty explicitly acknowledges that some widely circulated October 7th stories proved false and excluded testimony or images it considered unreliable. This matters, of course, epistemically. We should not reason, quote, Hamas committed mass atrocities, therefore every rape allegation was true. That wouldn't be responsible, right? That would be low resolution, unsound epistemic standards. Nor should we reason some atrocity stories were false, therefore all rape allegations were fabricated. Both are invalid. The correct approach is case-by-case evidentiary adjudication. What the body photographs can and cannot prove. There were photographs of victims who were partially or fully naked, naked below the waist, bound, shot, placed in unusual positions, or had injuries involving breasts, genital areas. Those facts are real and relevant, but none of those characteristics alone proves rape. Clothing may have been displaced for violence, dragging bodies, explosive force, emergency treatment, body recovery, decomposition, or deliberate humiliation unrelated to penetrative assault. Likewise, genital injury can arise from gunfire or generalized traumatic injury without proving sexual intent. This is why Patton described these patterns as circumstantial indicators, not forensic proof. Amnesty went even further methodologically. It declined to infer grape merely from body positioning or state of dress because such inferences were too uncertain. That is exactly the standard we should be using here, I think. The central logical error in Finkelstein's argument. Here is where Finkelstein goes from a strong criticism to an empirical failure. The argument effectively becomes, and here's the syllogism. Premise 1, there is no preserved forensic evidence establishing grape. Premise 2, there is no perpetrator filmed video plainly showing grape. Conclusion, therefore grape did not happen. Obviously, the conclusion does not follow. Grape cases can be established through combinations of survivor testimony, which, by the way, as we went over yesterday and a few other things and reviewing Dave's video, testimonial evidence is evidence. Testimony is evidence. Okay? This is where a lot of people will say there's no, and there'll be all of this testimony about something happening, and then people will say, and there was no evidence whatsoever for this thing, where they're just hand waving away testimonial evidence. Testimonial evidence still matters. It's still evidence. But most people, when it comes to what they would consider convincing evidence or reliable evidence, for many things, they would want to see more than testimonial evidence. Testimonial evidence can be very strong in some cases. Like if you have, 10 eyewitness accounts of a murder taking place, and you have 10 testimonies, eyewitness testimonies, that's not nothing. Even if you don't have any, even if the murderer was not identifiable and there was no forensic evidence left behind by the murderer. So in all fields, testimonial evidence is evidence. But when you get into fields of quantum mechanics, and you have an operator at the Large Hadron Collider saying they observed something that when they check the records, that thing they think they observed, they can't find any good reason to believe or be able to demonstrate that that thing occurred that this person is testifying to. That testimony is not going to weigh as heavy than, let's say, an eyewitness testimony to a murder would weigh in the court of law. For example, we also see, and it's a horrible reality, but I study a lot of law and true crime, and unfortunately, the eyewitness testimony of children is relied on heavily when it comes to domestic murder. And it's a horrible thing, but in those court cases, that can cause a conviction where without that testimony, there very well may have not have been a conviction. So yeah, it's don't get confused about testimony. Testimony is evidence. It's just in many cases we wouldn't consider it to be strong evidence. So we just went through the argument structure here. Premise 1, there is no preserved forensic evidence establishing grape. Premise 2, there is no perpetrator filmed video plainly showing grape. Conclusion, therefore, grape did not happen. The conclusion does not follow. And of course, if we find that that's not the kind of argument Finkelstein is making, and we will listen to it again here, then we can fix that. But the evidence of the transcript of what's being said, that seems to be the case. So grape cases, okay, so let's go through this again. Grape cases can be established through combinations of survivor testimony. We just talked about testimony, contemporaneous disclosure, eyewitness accounts, medical or therapeutic records, circumstantial evidence, digital evidence surrounding the event, perpetrator statements, and corroboration among independent witnesses. Phone was yelling at me. Yeah, for those of you who are on X, I just shared that we were going live with this. If you wanted to repost that on X, that helps bring a lot more people into the room. Thank you. Physical injury is not a necessary consequence of grape, and biological evidence can disappear rapidly or never be collected. In this case, the problem is even more acute because many alleged victims were killed, their bodies rapidly recovered and buried, crime scenes were chaotic, and sexual assault protocols were not systematically applied. I hate that occurred. I hate that the bodies were treated in this way and so recklessly when forensic pathology, forensic work needed to, like, these are cases where this needs to happen so that justice can be clearly pursued based on the crimes that actually occurred. So the absence of grape kit DNA evidence was very little, or has very little Bayesian force compared with a situation where forensic examination was timely, systematic, and negative. But we should not overcorrect in the opposite direction. The strongest empirically responsible conclusion is not, it has been conclusively proven that Hamas systematically raped women on October 7th. That overstates the record. As of the evidence available through August 2026, conventional forensic evidence is extremely poor. Some major allegations were false. Some alleged rape locations could not be verified. Witness testimony has inconsistencies and limitations. Direct survivor testimony is unusually scarce. Perpetrator attribution is not always possible. The scale, prevalence of grape cannot be reliably quantified, and an organizational order or policy to commit grape has not been established by the strongest independent investigations. At the same time, Patton found reasonable grounds for gang rape at several locations. Independent investigators found a broader pattern of sexual violence. Amnesty directly interviewed a man reporting rape. Amnesty obtained professional reports concerning additional rape survivors. Multiple witnesses have reported rape or sexual assault. Sexual assault during abduction is documented, and sexual violence against some hostages is supported at a stronger evidentiary level. The categorical denial is therefore untenable. So to re-adjudicate the specific claims here, the claim there is no single digital frame depicting rape, sexual violence. It's qualified but partly unverifiable. Some digital material provides circumstantial evidence of sexual abuse without depicting penetration. An absolute statement about every digital item held by Israel, Hamas, intelligence agencies, or private individuals, of course, cannot be established. So, yeah, the problem is with the absolute claim that there is no single digital frame depicting rape, sexual violence. It's too universal. It's too absolute. There might be. This is why you want to speak in terms of there has not been demonstrated a single digital frame depicting rape, sexual violence, if you're going to make that claim. Claim the only reasonable conclusion is that the sexual violence, quote, never happened. This is false. We've already demonstrated that. Okay. Now, we did have someone send in a super chat. And it said, and I know there's a lot of controversy and discussions surrounding this. Did Hasan Piker shock his dog? So the super chatter said, let us not forget Hasan shocked his dog and is lying about it in a very Trump-like way. How many of you believe that Hasan Piker shocked his dog? Let's say Y for yes that you believe that, N for no, you don't currently believe that. And if you don't know if it happened, then that means you're not convinced of the proposition that it did happen. So let's get your answers. We can go through this. So let's investigate two separate factual allegations here. Did Hasan Piker actually deliver an electric shock to Kaya on October 7th? What? On October 7th, 2025? Is that when this was? This was on October 7th? Wow. Has he knowingly lied about what happened afterward? That's the second proposition. Kaya suddenly, I can't believe I'm investigating this. Okay. Kaya suddenly yelped immediately after Hasan angrily directed her back and appeared to reach off camera. That's supported. Hasan had access to electronic dog training collars. That's supported. At least one collar associated with Kaya appears to have been shock-capable hardware. There's credible evidence, but it's not conclusively model verified yet. Hasan electrically shocked Kaya in the viral clip. That's unresolved, substantial circumstantial evidence, but not proven. Someone says yes. Hasan's quote, "It was only an AirTag defense." The verdict, not actually his final defense, often mischaracterized. Hasan consistently maintained that the same collar seen during the incident was vibration only. His statements are more complicated and materially shift over time. Hasan's later accounts contain a significant inconsistency over which collar Kaya was wearing that day. That's supported. Hasan knowingly fabricated his explanation. Plausible, but intent is not established. Quote, he shocked his dog and is lying about it, overstated as an established fact. And then this added part, in a Trump-like way, that's a rhetorical opinion, not independently fact checkable. I mean, we could do some behavior analysis and whatever, but what the original video actually establishes. The October 7th clip has a genuinely suspicious sequence. Kaya starts moving away from her place. Hasan, apparently frustrated, says, essentially, Kaya, please just effing go back. He appears to reach to his left off camera. Kaya suddenly yelps. Hasan finishes, just stop. He then reacts, Jesus Christ, what are you doing? You're being such a baby. Kaya returns / settles. Hasan does not immediately get up to inspect the foot that he would later suggest she injured. Independent contemporary descriptions of Forbes and TMZ agree on the essential observable sequence: movement, Hasan reaching, immediate yelp, dog settling. This is covered by Forbes. That temporal relationship is real circumstantial evidence. If the hypothesis is Hasan presses an electronic dog collar remote, Kaya experiences an aversive stimulus, Kaya yelps and returns. The observable timing fits it very well. But it also does not demonstrate that directly. We can see a remote being pressed. Sorry, we cannot see a remote being pressed. The underside of Kaya's collar at the instant, its model number, its contact points, an electrical discharge, or telemetry from the device. Telemetry from the device. And a dog can suddenly yelp from catching a dew claw or paw. So the video is probative, but not dispositive. Hasan's first explanation during the controversy emerging from the stream, Hasan said Kaya had apparently clipped herself on something getting off the bed. His more developed account was that he did not know exactly what caused the yelp, but suspected she had caught or tweaked her dew claw while following the place command. He subsequently told Philip DeFranco, I didn't press anything. I didn't have any remote or anything with me. He said the electronic collar he uses for Kaya can't actually shock her, and said the yelp was probably the dew claw. That is a testable factual defense, not merely, quote, I love my dog. His October 8th collar demonstration is where things became complicated. On the next day's stream, Hasan showed viewers a collar. His wording was, this is the one that people are talking about, and then this is the one that they saw. He continued, it has the capacity to vibrate, and that's it. He displayed an air tag and described vibration, a nightlight, and tracking sound functionality. That presentation quite literally gives the viewer the impression this is the collar at issue, and this collar cannot shock Kaya. Indeed, contemporary news coverage interpreted it that way. Forbes, the New York Post, and other outlets reported that he showed the collar at the center of the allegations. Man, people weren't messing around with this, eh? There is, however, an important contextual wrinkle. Elsewhere in the same response, Hasan referred to one of the collars people were pointing to from months ago as a vibration collar. Therefore, quote, the one that they saw could conceivably mean a collar visible in the older footage critics were circulating, rather than an explicit sworn assertion that it was the precise collar and Kaya at the it was the precise collar on Kaya at the instant she yelped. So there's some ambiguity here. Then QT Cinderella physically inspected a caller. This is probably the strongest evidence critics have beyond the original clip. QT Cinderella, Hasan's friend and colleague, said she personally went to his house and inspected the collar after the controversy started. She reported the collar is taped off where I think there would be prongs. She subsequently described it as having both vibration and shock functionality, but said the electric prongs are taken out, and therefore it could only vibrate in the state in which she inspected it. This creates an important distinction. Shock-capable device is not equal to device capable of shocking Kaya when QT inspected it. If the electrical contacts had genuinely been removed, there would be no skin electrodes through which the receiver could deliver the normal static stimulus. But QT inspected it after October 7th. That means her observation cannot tell us whether the contacts had always been removed, were removed months before, were removed by the trainer, or were removed after the viral incident. There is no publicly authenticated pre-incident underside photograph that resolves this. Oh my God. Could that hardware really work this way? Yes. This isn't an internet invention. eCollar Technologies ET300 Mini Educator is explicitly capable of vibration, tone, and 100 levels of static electrical stimulation. The manufacturer's own specifications say, quote, static stimulation, yes. It also includes 2 sets of metal contact points and, significantly, a contact point removal tool. So removing the electrical contacts is entirely physically possible and is explicitly contemplated by the manufacturer. That means QT's description of a shock-capable receiver with its contacts removed is technically plausible. But there really is a vibration-only model. This is an important fact that many accusatory threads omit. The same manufacturer sells the PG300 pager only, which has vibration, tone, 100 adjustable vibration levels, a night tracking light, no static stimulation. The manufacturer's specification explicitly says static stimulation, no. Even more importantly, the 2 product families look sufficiently similar that low resolution twitch footage is poor model identification evidence. The shock capable ET300 transmitter is listed at approximately 2.6 by 1.3 inches, while the vibration only PG300's transmitter is approximately 2.6 by 1.3 inches as well. Both have beacon night lights, and the PG300 receiver is compatible with the broader Educator remote ecosystem. Therefore, I saw a green blinking light round Educator remote. Therefore, it must be the shock model is not reliable evidence. That argument should be excluded from a serious report. Okay, we're at number 7. How much more is this? Oh my. Since this doesn't have to do with the video of today, there's a lot of other evidence to go through, and I will actually publish on our website a fact check of this, but I do want to get back into the video here. So a viral October 7th, 2025 live stream provides substantial circumstantial evidence that Hasan Piker may have activated an electronic trainer collar when his dog Kaya suddenly yelped after he ordered her back to her place. Piker denies administering either a shock or vibration and attributes the yelp to an accidental paw dew claw injury. Subsequent evidence establishes that electronic collars were used in Kaya's training environment, and Piker's friend, QT Cinderella, later inspected a collar she described as shock-capable hardware with its electrical contacts removed. However, no public evidence establishes the collar's electrical configuration at the instant of the incident or directly shows Piker activating it. Piker's subsequent accounts of which collar Kaya was wearing evolved in a materially confusing way, from displaying, quote, the one people had seen and saying it could only vibrate, to later saying that Kaya was wearing only a regular collar and did not have the electronic collar on that day. This makes skepticism about his account reasonable, but does not by itself prove deliberate lying. So, final ratings here. Hasan shocked Kaya. Unresolved. Substantial circumstantial evidence. Hasan has given inconsistent explanations. Supported. Hasan is knowingly lying. Plausible, but unproven. Hasan shocked his dog and is lying about it in a Trump-like way, like the super chatter said. This is qualified but overstated, in that there's some plausibility to it. And the Trump-like way would, of course, be your own, normative opinion. So, yeah, interesting. Looks like there's some debating going on in the chat. That's great. So let's go to now that we've dealt with that. So, and we just adjudicated the October 7th sexual violence evidence. And then, yes, eventually the claim is made. The only possible conclusion is that sexual violence never happened. We will probably still hear that. I don't think we've gotten that far. This is a non sequitur. Sexual crimes are often established through testimony, circumstantial patterns, injuries, hostage accounts, and corroborating evidence rather than a perpetrator-filmed recording. Multiple UN findings directly contradict the categorical conclusion. So the absence of publicly identified perpetrator-filmed rape video does not prove that sexual violence did not occur. Testimony, circumstantial patterns, injuries, hostage accounts, and corroboration can establish sexual crimes, and UN findings contradict categorical denial. So we're not at 59 yet of this, are we? Let's let this run through. Lenny Foster, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. I really appreciate that. It says, I entered right at the Dogtober 7th discourse. Dogtober 7th. Oh, man. I remember Stephen, when we were out on tour on the anti-Trump debate tour, I remember Stephen laughing his ass off and sharing some things with me about that when we were on the road. Just going to switch to my earbud for a second here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as a first approximation, you could say not much could have escaped the collective lens
Yeah.
of 10,000 photographs and digital segments,
including GoPro camera footage from the militants themselves.
Yeah, we're going to go through
all of that doesn't mean it didn't happen. This is bad reasoning.
CCTV,
Yeah.
traffic cameras, iPhones, on the militants themselves, body cams, dash cams, GoPros. So now, where was the digital evidence? There isn't one. I hope your viewers will hear this, your listeners. There is not one single frame of Hamas committing rape or sexual violence. Bear in mind, there's not only just an absence of any digital evidence, which would take 7 months to go through, of all the various technological paraphernalia, CCTV, traffic cameras, body cam, dash cam.
So just in response to that, just so we get this in the record again, the claim that there is no single digital frame depicting rape or sexual violence. Patton's extensive review did not identify open source footage specifically depicting a completed rape, which substantially supports the narrow point, but an absolute statement about every digital item held by Israel, Hamas, intelligence agencies, or private individuals cannot be established. Moreover, some digital material provides circumstantial evidence of sexual abuse without depicting things like penetration. So let's go back a little bit here. Let's listen to the exact
one single frame of Hamas committing rape or sexual violence.
Some digital materials provides circumstantial evidence of sexual abuse without depicting the actual acts. So that's why this framing is misleading.
Bear in mind, there's not only just an absence of any digital evidence, which would take 7 months to go.
It's not that there's an absence of any digital evidence like we just pointed out. There is circumstantial digital evidence.
Go through of all the various technological paraphernalia, CCTV, traffic cameras, body cam, dash cam, GoPro, not one of rape, not one of sexual violence, not one frame. Now, here is the thing that.
Yeah, he keeps saying not one frame, but again, just to correct it again, there are different pieces that provide circumstantial evidence.
It's most perplexing. So in that most recent report by Dr. El-Kayem Levy, she says that Hamas instrumentalized all this digital evidence to terrorize Israeli society. They purposely posted horrific pictures on their social media.
Mm-hmm.
They sent pictures to family members. So if Hamas had any pictures of sexual violence or rape, should have posted it, according to her. That's what she said. They were purposely posting horrific images to terrify and terrorize Israeli society. They didn't post anything. So what?
Yeah, just because they chose, in some cases not to post it, again, that doesn't mean they don't have that footage. There's some bad logic being displayed here.
This is the only
bad reasoning.
In my opinion, what's the only possible conclusion? If they didn't post any, it's because they didn't have any such images.
The only possible conclusion is that the reason why they didn't post any was because they didn't have any. That is, I'm sorry to say, but that's dog shit reasoning. And he's not even saying plausible. He's saying possible here. Yeah, it's possible they didn't want to post it because maybe someone from Hamas command said, no, don't post anything like that because that's going to make it more difficult, to garner support in the West for our cause. That's just one possibility, right? We're not even talking about plausibility here. We're just talking about possibility. They had this, they were playing 4D chess, and we're going to commit these grapes and these sexual assaults, and we're going to post about everything else except those things, so that we can create some kind of scenario that makes it seem like some of these victims are just simply lying, because Hamas would have surely posted that information if they had it. That's what Finkelstein has fallen for here, it seems. Very bad reasoning.
And
he said it's the only possible conclusion. Like, that's insanity.
If they didn't have any such images, it's because it never happened.
Yes, including the
Yes, Hasan agrees with him on that. Oh my. Wow. Okay. I think these two gentlemen could really benefit from joining the Pangburn Universe Discord server and having regular conversations with the great logicians and philosophers that we have in our server. Because like that would obviously be like laughed out of the room by any logicians, right? There is a real lack of philosophical education in the world in general. It's a real problem. And it's something I write about in my first book, which should be out this spring or sometime next year. The plan was this fall, but it's just not ready. I haven't had enough time. So is what it is. But holy monkey balls, some really bad reasoning on display. Unsound, low resolution epistemic standards, and the thing we started off with today, the ethical standards, the ethical deliberation happening here, and by Finkelstein and being agreed with by Hasan Piker with regards to, the conversation about the relationship between rape and murder, the fact that murder's, a higher crime, why even mention the rape? And Finkelstein said it has no bearing on the greater picture, and Hasan agreed with him. Like that's terrifying moral reasoning.
Body camera footage that Israel also extracted later down the line as well.
It's terrifying moral reasoning because it minimizes the victims, the people who have been demonstrated to have been victims of sexual assault. And, whether or not you believe the grape allegations or not, there are still potentially grape victims out there, and minimizing grape in general in that kind of way that this conversation is approached is, it's actually quite terrifying and sickening, I must say, from a moral well-beingist perspective.
From some of the militants that were captured.
They captured and killed. They took the cameras.
Yeah.
There was nothing there. Now, you might say, well, Hamas didn't want to damage its reputation by filming that stuff, but there's a problem with it.
But Israel would present this as evidence.
So you can make the argument maybe they turned off.
Yeah, he said so. Yeah, he brought this up. One of the possible scenarios that I, that came right off the top of my head.
The camera. I don't believe it for a moment. But the problem with it is, you said that they were instrumentalizing these pictures in order to terrify and terrorize. So they wouldn't have turned off the camera. They would have purposely photographed it and then
Well, they might have done that, and then the strategy changed, and that's why they didn't post that stuff. We're still not refuting cleanly what is believed to be the refutation is not there. It's just not. The logic is unsound.
Transmitted it.
Yeah.
So by their own argument, it couldn't have happened. Now, as I said, there's.
So let's talk about the why.
Doesn't mean it couldn't have happened.
Why?
Why?
Why was rape, sexual assault, like sexual assault directed by Hamas? Why was that
So that hasn't been demonstrated. That has been that Hamas directed sexual assault, like from a command perspective. But that doesn't mean it won't be demonstrated, right? I want to adjudicate that one more time.
the initial line of attack in your by your estimation from the Israeli side?
I think there were basically two reasons. First of all of Israeli propaganda is directed at American society. And in the United States, the rape, the dark-hued Arab raping a virginal white woman, it has a deep historical resonance. So it was going to play well here. The second reason, and I probably will get criticized for this, it's because of the woke culture. And that's what I think happened with the UN investigations, what happened with the Human Rights Watch investigation, what happened with the Amnesty investigation. That they, because Me Too, believe women, you're not allowed to question. They don't like Muslims to begin with, these liberal organizations. They don't. I mean,
overgeneralization. This is fallacious. So this idea that UN and human rights bodies capitulated because of woke culture and anti-Muslim prejudice, this assigns a common motive to distinct institutions without documentary proof. Their reports contain caveats, rejected allegations, and differing confidence levels, which cuts against a simple coordinated capitulation account. So the reports may be criticized methodologically, but no documentary evidence establishes a common institutional motive of, quote, woke culture or anti-Muslim prejudice. This has not been demonstrated. It's kind of the same thing from the Dave Farina propaganda video, where this attribution is being made to this large group of people, sometimes in ways where there's counter evidence to that claim. But even if there wasn't counter evidence, that wouldn't mean that the claim is true or demonstrated or supported. Wild.
We should be on. I mean, I can speak at length about the relationship. The human rights organizations had a very different relationship with the West Bank than they did with Gaza. Because in the West Bank, Ramallah is like another metropolis has a higher standard of living than most big cities in the world. They can relate to that secular culture in Ramallah. They can't relate to Gaza. And so there's always been, by the liberal, secular human rights organizations, the UN Commissions of Inquiry, there's always been a double standard when it came to Gaza. So
these are just like vast sweeping generalizations with no citations or examples being given. Just, yeah, take my word for it, bro. There always has been. That's not been demonstrated.
I think that there was a certain kind of certainty that you could play that card and get away with it when it came to sexual violence and rape, which in other aspects, the human rights organizations were in bed in their investigations. It was this particular issue where they capitulated, and I think they capitulated because of the woke culture.
So you then...
I mean, there were points where it's just it was really, I have to say, it was stomach churning. So they want to prove, let's say, take the case of the UN Commission of Inquiry. It was headed by Navi Pillay, who was the former High Commissioner for Human Rights, a respected figure in South Africa. She's a South African of Indian descent. So she knows there's no evidence of sexual violence. She knows that. She knows there's no forensic evidence, there's no digital evidence, but she has to go along with the...
There is circumstantial evidence and there is testimonial evidence. This is so anti-intellectual. Circumstantial evidence is still evidence and testimonial evidence is still evidence. Nothing about what I've seen so far really in this conversation is academic.
Woke culture. So what does she do? She says, well, we saw pictures of women hostages who were taken and that they were placed on motor scooters or motorcycles between two Hamas militants. So you think to yourself, yeah, okay, there's a woman placed between, and we all know taking hostages is wrong. Not a complicated question. But what does this have to do with sexual violence? So she says, by placing two Hamas militants in the front and back of her, Hamas was guilty. The expression they use is coerced intimacy. Okay, taking hostages is wrong. But is there a new rule of international law that if you take a woman hostage, you have to book an Uber? I mean, this is just stupid.
That's a very insensitive thing to say. I am not impressed by the moral fortitude of this individual Finkelstein. Go back a bit here.
In the front and back of her, Hamas was guilty. The expression they use is coerced intimacy. Okay.
Let's look at the history of coerced intimacy. We'll adjudicate that. So yeah, and I just wanted to re-adjudicate this because it's a really important point. So yeah, like we mentioned, there's currently no publicly verifiable explicit order um, for Hamas fighters to grape or sexually assault people on October 7th. And then there's some related claims, just to clear this up as well. So the claim Hamas members or other Palestinian attackers committed sexual violence, the cumulative evidence is substantial. Sexual violence was widespread, systematic, and part of the operational strategy. This is disputed, but increasingly supported by some investigations. Or senior Hamas leadership bears responsibility for sexual crimes committed against hostages. Yeah, there is significant judicial support for that. The ICC found reasonable grounds for DIF's criminal responsibility for rape and sexual violence, including through modes encompassing ordering / inducing and command responsibility, but the public record does not establish a specific explicit rape command. So just wanted to go through that again. We are looking into this idea of coerced or forced intimacy as as sexual assault. I mean, to me, when I hear that, I don't see anything wrong with that legal determination being legitimate. Coerced or forced intimacy. I mean, should be a crime at some level. So we've seen turns to the UN Commission of Inquiry chaired by Navi Pillay. He says the commission had no forensic or digital proof of rape, then mocks one of its findings. Female hostages were transported on motorcycles between male abductors, which the commission described as coerced intimacy. Finkelstein asks rhetorically whether international law now requires kidnappers to book an Uber. What the UN actually said. The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry's 2024 report says that 90 women and girls were abducted to Gaza, and that filmed abductions showed women forced onto vehicles, including motorcycles. In several cases, women were seated between two men on a small motorcycle, which the commission described as forcing them into coerced intimacy with their abductors. It then calls this type of gender-based crime. An interesting textual detail, the advanced unedited version, an advanced unedited version contained the grammatically awkward phrase, quote, forced them to coerced intimacy. The subsequently published UN version corrected that to forcing them into coerced intimacy. So this was not a, okay. The detailed commission paper adds substantially more. In its much longer October 7th findings, paragraph 160 says the investigators reviewed several actual abduction videos. Among the conduct described, one woman tries to turn her head away and an abductor forcibly turns it back toward him. Another woman is visibly struggling and pleading to be released while being abducted on a motorcycle. In another video, the man behind a woman covers her face with black material while almost sitting on top of her as she cries out in fear and anguish. Women were forcibly pressed into close bodily proximity with male abductors while being filmed. So the underlying evidence was not simply 3 people had to fit on a motorcycle. That is an important correction to Finkelstein's Uber joke. In Is coerced intimacy actually an established legal concept? Not as such, it says here. This is one place where Finkelstein has a legitimate criticism. I can find no crime called coerced intimacy in the Geneva Conventions, the Rome Statute, the ICC elements of crimes, the ICTY, ICTR statutes, or standard ICRC sexual violence terminology. The normal international law categories are things such as rape, sexual assault, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, sexual violence, indecent assault, humiliating or degrading treatment, and outrages upon personal dignity. So, you would have to target, if you're trying this legally, you'd have to target things like outrages upon personal dignity, or sexual assault, indecent assault. Quote, coerced intimacy appears to be the Commission's descriptive phrase, not an established term of art. The words forced intimacy and coerced intimacy existed before October 7th in sociology, feminist writing, disability scholarship, and discussions of sexual coercion. For example, researchers have used, quote, forced intimacy to describe unwanted compulsory disclosure or intimacy in qualified research. And disability activist Maya Mingus has used it for disabled people being compelled to expose private aspects of themselves to navigate an ableist environment. In other contexts, quote, forced intimacy is used euphemistically for coerced sexual activity. None of that establishes, quote, coerced intimacy as an international humanitarian law offense. But the Commission did not actually create a new war crime called coerced intimacy. This is the most important corrective here. The detailed legal analysis tells us what the Commission thought it was doing. At paragraph 289, it says the conduct demonstrated the gendered nature of the existing war crime of outrages upon personal dignity. That's kind of what I had inferred. Like, if I was trying this legally, that's gendered nature of the existence war crime of outrages upon personal dignity, particularly humiliating and degrading treatment, endless indecent assault, and coerced intimacy. Among the conduct against women during their capture and transportation to Gaza. That means the Commission's reasoning was approximately hostage taking plus forced bodily positioning plus humiliation plus intimidation plus gendered treatment leads to outrage upon personal dignity and gender-based abuse, not sitting between two men on a motorcycle equals rape. Finkelstein's presentation blurs that distinction. There's a long legal history behind the broader category. The relevant legal concept is much older than, quote, coerced intimacy. So 1949, Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 27 requires that protected civilians be treated with respect for their persons and honor and protected against violence, threats, insults, and public curiosity. It also specifically provides that women must be protected against rape, enforced prostitution, and any form of indecent assault. The modern ICRC commentary defines indecent assault along the lines of unwanted, inappropriate sexual contact or fondling, or sexual assault short of rape. 1949 Article 3. Common Article 3 prohibits, quote, outrages upon personal dignity, in particular, humiliating and degrading treatment. This became customary international humanitarian law and eventually a war crime under the Rome Statute. International courts have held that an outrage upon personal dignity requires serious humiliation, degradation, or an objectively serious assault upon human dignity. Not every uncomfortable or unwanted interaction qualifies. 1990s, Rwanda and Yugoslavia tribunals broadened sexual violence doctrine. A major development came in the ICTR's Akayesu judgment. The tribunal defined sexual violence as an act of sexual nature committed under coercive circumstances and emphasized that sexual violence need not involve penetration or even physical contact. Forced public nudity became a paradigmatic example. Later ICTY decisions adopted the same general approach. This matters because it explains why modern international investigators do not restrict, quote, sexual violence to intercourse or genital contact. Rome statutes and ICC. The ICC framework nevertheless requires an, quote, act of a sexual nature. For the individual war crime of sexual violence, the perpetrator must commit an act of a sexual nature against someone or force that person to engage in such an act through force, threats, detention, psychological oppression, abuse of power, or another coercive environment. For the residual war crime provision, comparable gravity requirements also apply. The ICC prosecutor has expressly noted that the act need not involve physical contact, forced nudity. Forced nudity is an example, but it still needs a genuine sexual character. That creates the key analytical question here. Does merely sitting between two male kidnappers constitute sexual violence? Not obviously. Suppose the entire fact pattern were simply a female hostage is put between two male abductors because three people have to fit on a motorcycle. Without sexual touching, sexual comments, intentionally sexual positioning, forced nudity, sexualized humiliation, fondling, genital contact, sexual intent, or another objectively sexual feature, I would not be comfortable classifying the physical proximity itself as sexual violence under the ICC definition. Being kidnapped remains an extremely serious crime. Being forcibly transported remains coercive. Being tightly pressed against armed captors can unquestionably be terrifying, but coercive plus close bodily proximity does not automatically meet the sexual standard. That is where the Commission's phrase, coerced intimacy, is analytically loose. The ICRC's sexual violence definition still requires an act of a sexual nature imposed through coercion. Could it be an outrage upon personal dignity? This is substantially more plausible. International humanitarian law recognizes humiliating and degrading treatment separately from rape and sexual assault. The ICRC standard asks whether the act seriously humiliates, degrades, or violates person's dignity. Importantly, cultural background and circumstances can matter. And multiple individually less serious acts can cumulatively constitute an outrage upon personal dignity. Consider the actual Commission evidence rather than an abstract motorcycle. A captive woman is seized at gunpoint, physically restrained, forced between armed men, struggles to escape. One man forcibly manipulates her head. Another is effectively on top of her. Her face is covered. She cries in terror. The incident is filmed. Similar abducted women are publicly displayed and referred to as trophies. That entire package provides a substantially stronger basis for humiliating, degrading treatment than merely saying she sat close to two men. And that is ultimately where the Commission placed, quote, coerced intimacy in its legal analysis. Why did the Commission treat it as gender-based? This is another distinction Finkelstein compresses. Gender-based violence is broader than sexual violence. An act can be gender-based without being sexual. The relevant question is whether the conduct was imposed because of sex, gender, or disproportionately took a particular gendered form. The commission argued that women were disproportionately subjected to this treatment. Women were treated as, quote, trophies and objects. Female bodies were publicly displayed. Gendered insults were used, and similar patterns appeared across multiple locations. It therefore interpreted some abduction practices through a gendered humiliation framework. Whether every motorcycle case justifies that inference is debatable, but it is incorrect to translate gender-based degrading treatment automatically into rape allegation. There has been substantive criticism of this exact terminology. Finkelstein is not the only person to object. A pro-Palestinian feminist critique of the commission specifically attacks paragraph 160, arguing that motorcycles were used to transport both male and female hostages. So treating female passengers close physical proximity as a gender-based crime risks classifying ordinary logistical features of kidnapping as gender violence merely because the captive is a woman. That is a legitimate methodological criticism. The stronger version is, if male and female captives were transported similarly, the commission needs additional evidence demonstrating why the female cases constituted gender-based humiliation rather than simply the ordinary physical circumstances of forcible transportation. And fortunately, the detailed report does provide some additional evidence: forced positioning, physical domination, insults, filming, trophy treatment, but it does not demonstrate that every instance of a woman being seated between two men was independently a sexual or gender crime. That distinction should have been more clearly expressed. Was the phrase ever retracted or clarified? There doesn't seem to be any UN retraction or substantive repudiation of coerced intimacy. What happened instead is interesting. May 2024, the advance report said forcing them to coerced intimacy, which was grammatically defective. The final published version became forcing them into coerced intimacy. The commission repeated the concept in paragraph 160 and then explicitly placed coerced intimacy within gendered outrages upon personal dignity at paragraph 289. 2026, the Israeli Civil Commission's Silence No More report. Commission's Silence No More report actually cites the UN's paragraph 160 when discussing coercive physical treatment during abductions. So the terminology has continued to be referenced rather than formally withdrawn. But that still does not transform, quote, coerced intimacy into an established doctrinal category comparable to rape, sexual slavery, or sexual assault. So where Finkelstein misrepresents the report, his "do you have to book an Uber" formulation makes it sound as though the commission reasoned Hamas failed to provide female hostages with sufficiently spacious transportation, therefore sexual violence. That's not a fair rendering of the full report. The detailed evidence includes physical coercion, women struggling against abductors, forced manipulation of their bodies, men pressed onto them, intimidation, gendered insults, public filming, treating captives as trophies, and other humiliating treatment. And legally, the commission classified, quote, coerced intimacy principally as part of gendered outrages upon personal dignity rather than inventing a standalone crime requiring terrorists to provide female hostages with personal transportation. So the joke lands against the commission's poor terminology, but substantially caricatures its underlying factual and legal argument. So the verdict here, with Finkelstein's claim being the UN Commission resorted to calling women sitting between Hamas militants on motorcycles, quote, coerced intimacy, essentially inventing a ridiculous sexual violence rule because it lacked real evidence, is misleading. The UN Commission genuinely used the unusual phrase coerced intimacy for female abductees forced into close physical proximity with male abductors on motorcycles. Coerced intimacy is not a recognized standalone international law crime, and mere close seating would not by itself clearly satisfy the legal definition of sexual violence. Here's the material correction. The Commission did not classify motorcycle proximity as grape and did not establish a rule requiring gender-separated transportation. Its detailed evidence described additional coercive and humiliating behavior, and its legal analysis placed, quote, coerced intimacy principally within the established war crime of outrages upon personal dignity, alongside gender-based humiliating and degrading treatment. Finkelstein's, quote, book and Uber analogy strips away that surrounding evidence. Nobody should fall for that. So, of course, there's so much misleading about what was said here. Thanks for being with me tonight, everyone. Make sure you smash that like button. I really like seeing the chat active, so make sure you're dropping your own opinions, questions. If you want me to respond specifically, if you shoot me a super chat, I will respond. All right.
Taking hostages is wrong. But is there a new rule of international law? If you take a woman
No, there's no new rule of international law.
hostage, you have to book an Uber? I mean, this is just stupid. But they were so desperate, clutching at straws to come up with an argument. And as I said, I think it was in large part, first of all, it's the revulsion against Muslim men. And they were honest about that, by the way. They said in the human rights reports that Israel in particular was targeting Muslim young men and older men. That was clearly a target. I think they even called it acts of extermination or crimes against humanity. But the truth of the matter is they all carry that prejudice. And the Israelis knew that.
There's that again. They all carry that prejudice. All, every, absolutely. This kind of language you're going to see in propaganda. It's going to cause people to have it's moving in the direction of lower resolution as opposed to moving in the direction of specifics, specific cases, specific targets for your arguments. Overgeneralization fallacy is where good sound epistemic standards go to die. It's just the sign of low resolution thought, low resolution thinking.
That prejudice would resonate in the United States in particular. And the truth is, very few people challenged it. I mean, there were people who challenged it, no question about it. But it took a certain amount of, I don't want to call it courage, but you knew that you were going against the current. People like Sheryl Sandberg, the former chief operating officer of Meta, best known for her book Lean In.
Yeah.
He did this documentary called Screams Before Silence. It was just complete nonsense.
Yeah, you compared it to D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, arguing that she leans in on primordial racialized tropes of the feral, dark-hued rapist to mobilize Western psychic demons, similar to how Birth of a Nation incited lynchings of black people.
And the thing with Sheryl Sandberg,
Need to go back a little bit.
Mehta, best known for her book Lean In,
Yeah.
he did this documentary called Screams Before Silence. It was just complete nonsense.
Yeah, you compared it to D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, arguing that she leans in on primordial racialized tropes of the feral, dark-hued rapist to mobilize Western psychic demons, similar to how Birth of a Nation incited lynchings of black people.
And the thing with Sheryl Sandberg is no fool. We should be clear about that. She attended Harvard.
We're going to adjudicate the whole screams before silence thing. Really important to go through. It's nice to have YouTube Premium running, hey? For those of you who didn't hear earlier, the reason why I couldn't get YouTube Premium here in Oaxaca, Mexico is because I wasn't using a Mexican card, like debit card or credit card. And apparently I needed to use one for that. But it worked once I did that. So there you go. Hopefully you guys are doing good fact checking with each other in the comment section.
She studied economics. She was the top economics student in her class.
Mm-hmm.
Sheryl Sandberg knows what evidence is. This is not some Deborah Lipstadt.
Norm Finkelstein, as demonstrated by this video so far, seems to not know what evidence is. Circumstantial evidence being one of the cases, he seems to be confused about that, or testimonial evidence, the testimony itself as evidence.
This is somebody who has high standards of.
What is Finkelstein's educational background, by the way? I'm really curious about that now. Political scientist and author. He earned a bachelor's degree in history from Binghamton University in 1974. He then went to Princeton University, where he completed his master's degree and received his PhD in political science politics in 1982. Yeah, this is why, like, you really want to partner this with a philosophy degree, because then you end up going around the world and saying crap like what Finkelstein's been saying, in the really bad reasoning on display and a very poor grasp in logic. So it's like a BA in history in Binghamton University, MA in political science at Princeton University, PhD in political science and politics, Princeton University. Yeah. Yeah. The lack of philosophical prowess really is going to show. It doesn't matter if you're a PhD in some topic. It's going to show the limits of your good sound epistemic reasoning and thinking. your ability to articulate your ethical standards or to understand, where you may be in violation of your ethical standards by, treating an issue with not with due seriousness, like this kind of stuff. All right. Let's take a look back at where we're. Yeah, I'm doing a deep dive into the Screams Before Silence critiques here by Finkelstein and Hasan. This report is going to be much bigger than I initially thought it was going to be when I ran the first pass through of some of the main misinformation problems. But yeah, there's a buttload in this video. Buttload, by the way, is a high resolution epistemic term. Yeah. Okay, let's hear a bit more, but we will
Evidence.
get some information.
But then when it came to this, she just, it's the cause. It's the cause. In the cause.
That's mind reading. Fallacious.
There is the cause and there are the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact.
This is more conspiratorial thinking.
Are trivial things as compared to the cause. And for her, Israel must live. So whether she does it wittingly, unwittingly, I have no idea.
But he's convinced that she's doing it for those reasons. Even if she knows she's doing it or she doesn't know she's doing it. Conspiratorial, mind reading, low resolution.
She manages either convince herself that these are facts, or she convinces herself that the cause is more important.
More mind reading, more mind reading, more mind reading. Fallacious.
Someone like Alan Dershowitz, who I've had interactions with, and I know pretty well, his mind. For Alan Dershowitz, it's just the cause. He knows what the facts are. Someone like her, I don't know.
Okay.
What I do know for certain is there's no evidence.
So on the other side of that, there is also the verified.
So Hasan is just, I guess he just agrees with everything that Finkelstein is saying here. There's no interjections like, I don't know if we should be mind reading like that. That's probably not the best thing. He's just kind of going along with it here.
Incidents by the UN of sexual violence by Israeli forces against Palestinian detainees in Sde Taiman, Ketziot, Ofer. However, in March 2026, the charges against these Sde Taiman reservists were dropped entirely. And this also led to something I call the pro-rape January 6th riots that unfolded in Israel as well. It was a massive controversy. It got very little coverage in the United States of America because, unfortunately, our corporate media is completely complicit in Israel.
Pro-rape riots. All right, I don't want to get too far ahead here.
There's no evidence.
So on the other side of that, there is also the verified incidents by the UN of sexual violence by Israeli forces against Palestinian detainees in Sde Taiman, Ketziot, Ofer. However, in
yes, that is true.
March 2026, the charges against these Sde Taiman reservists were dropped entirely. And this also led to something I call the pro-rape January 6th riots that unfolded in
Gotta hear that one more
There's
time.
no evidence.
So
Really?
on the other side of that, there is also the verified incidents by the UN of sexual violence by Israeli forces against Palestinian detainees in Sde Taiman, Ketziot, Ofer. However, in March 2026, the charges against these Sde Taiman reservists were dropped entirely. And this also led to something I call the pro-rape January 6th riots that unfolded in Israel as well. It was a massive controversy. It got very little coverage in the United States of America because, unfortunately, our corporate media is completely complicit in Israel's actions. That, I think,
that media conspiracy theory that they're completely complicit with regards to Israel's actions is just, it's so easy to debunk, and we debunked it in Dave's video. But there are many mainstream media outlets that it's quite easy to see that they're not just simply complicit, and we will pull up all that information. Of course, we're going to adjudicate it again for the sake of this report and this video. But it's a common conspiracy theory that, you know, the United States media is owned or controlled by Israel or the Jews. This kind of tale as old as time conspiracy theory. So we will get some information on that as well. Need to make a note of that.
There's no evidence.
So on the other side of that, there is also the verified incidents by the UN of sexual violence by Israeli forces against Palestinian detainees in Sde Taiman, Ketziot, Ofer. However, in March 2026, the charges against these Sde Taiman reservists were dropped entirely.
And I believe those cases were handled by the IDF, and I think Hasan is reporting this accurately, but I want to I'm still going to adjudicate it.
And this also led to something I call the pro-rape January 6th riots that unfolded in Israel as well. It was a massive controversy. It got very little coverage in the United States of America because, unfortunately, our corporate media is completely complicit in Israel's actions. That, I think, the initial prosecution of those 6 concentration camps guards were also in an effort to utilize or weaponize complementarity.
There's a lot stacked into this, what's being said here. Yeah, we're going to have to adjudicate the concentration camp claim again. Wish this let me go back like not so far, but it keeps throwing.
There's no evidence.
So on the other side of that, there is also the verified incidents by the UN of sexual violence by Israeli forces against Palestinian detainees in Sde Taiman, Ketziot, Ofer. However, in March 2026, the charges against these Sde Taiman reservists were dropped entirely. And this also led to something I call the pro-rape January 6th riots that unfolded in Israel as well. It was a massive controversy. It got very little coverage in the United States of America because, unfortunately, our corporate media is completely complicit in Israel's actions. That, I think, the initial prosecution of those 6 concentration camps guards were also in an effort to utilize or weaponize complementarity against the International Criminal Court, in my opinion. That's speculative. You may disagree with that. I don't know. I think
you should explain for your listeners what you mean by complementarity, because it's important for people to have clarity about these issues. The way our international legal system works is it says every nation.
Okay, in just that short amount of time, we opened up a lot of cans of worms here. So let's get to it. Oh boy. That's the thing. Like, there's so much information related to this stuff that is so relevant to having a high resolution grasp on the facts. That is why when people, I look at, well-educated usages of AI systems like I'm implementing here, I think AI is actually here to cure us of misinformation. That isn't to say that all AI systems, anyone using them, that's going to be a cure to misinformation. No, it's more just like how the internet was a step in that direction of curing the world of this problem of misinformation. But of course, it depends on how you use the internet. The same is true about AI tools. And the AI tools, if used incorrectly, can be utilized to sell you a piece of propaganda in the most undetectable ways. But if you become well educated, and let's say the young people of this world become well educated into how to use these systems to pull relevant facts together from many different competing sources, to give you plausibility in the right direction that cautions your level of commitment, for example. I really do think that this kind of technology is actually here to cure humanity of this misinformation, disinformation, global problem. But we have to use these tools correctly. Need to create a branch here. Wait, what? What happened to my... Oh, that's so annoying. Oh, that's probably why. When I rebranch it. Okay. Let's deal with screams before silence. So Finkelstein identifies several genuine evidentiary problems with screams before silence. weak or absent forensic evidence, some false or unverified atrocity stories, witnesses whose claims have been challenged, an unverified, quote, nails in the groin photograph, and most importantly, no independently established evidence that Hamas leadership ordered grape as an operational policy. But he then goes too far. The evidence does not support his portrayal of the documentary as basically, quote, complete nonsense, nor his suggestion that the sexual violence case collapses once the weak claims are removed. There is substantial independent evidence that sexual violence occurred. Yeah, we already went through all that. UN Patton mission found reasonable grounds for grape and gang grape at several October 7th locations. Amnesty later investigated, said grape on October 7th was likely. Sexual assault of some hostages is particularly well corroborated. Critical distinction is sexual violence occurred is strongly supported. So here are the arguments or claims that Finkelstein, the propositions he makes in this video. So the UN Commission, with regards to this, screams before silence film. The UN Commission could not definitively establish grape. That's supported by Finkelstein. So we're doing Finkelstein's propositions versus the verdict. HRW did not independently document a rape case, supported, but incomplete context. There was little to no usable forensic evidence. That's largely supported. Some famous atrocity stories were false or unverified, supported. The, quote, nails in the groin photograph did not prove the allegations, supported. Some Sandberg witnesses are unreliable, partly supported. Important case exists. We'll get into that. Therefore, Sandberg's documentary is complete nonsense, materially misleading, untenable as a blanket claim. We can know, quote, with certainty that Hamas did not commit mass grape as a weapon of war. That's unsupported certainty. Sandberg knowingly subordinated facts to Zionism / the cause. That's unsupported motive attribution. We just went through that. The film galvanized American support for the Gaza war / genocide in a manner analogous to Birth of a Nation. That's a plausible interpretation. Causation has not been established. Hasan accurately summarizes Finkelstein's Birth of a Nation analogy and does not challenge it in this exchange. The transcript, okay, yeah. Finkelstein is right about the forensic evidence problem. We already talked about that. Yeah, so we already talked about Pramila Patten with all the evidence there. The Amit Susanna evidence is devastating to the, quote, complete nonsense characterization. This is especially important because Amit Susanna appears in Screams Before Silence. She described being sexually assaulted at gunpoint by a captor while held in Gaza. This isn't merely an isolated media anecdote. Amnesty records that 2 named Israeli doctors and a social worker confirmed that Susanna reported the sexual violence after her release. Amnesty also independently verified footage of her violent abduction. That doesn't prove mass rape on October 7th itself. It does prove something very important for assessing the film. The documentary containing Susanna's testimony cannot rationally be dismissed wholesale as fabricated sexual violence propaganda. Her case is evidence of sexual violence during captivity, not evidence that every grape story from the massacre sites was accurate. So Finkelstein, again, with the bad reasoning here, goes from no evidence of Hamas grape order to something approaching, we can say with certainty that Hamas did not commit mass grape as a weapon of war. Absence of evidence for a central order isn't affirmative evidence that no organizational encouragement, tolerance, emergent pattern, or widespread perpetration existed. And, quote, mass grape itself isn't being operationalized. Does that mean 5 victims, 20, 100, multiple perpetrators, multiple sites, a centrally ordered policy? Without a denominator or definition, quote, mass grape becomes rhetorically slippery. The newest evidence makes categorical certainty even harder. In May 2026, the Israeli Non-Governmental Civil Commission released Silence No More, claiming that after reviewing more than 10,000 visual items and 430 plus testimonies, interviews, it found sexual violence to be widespread and systematic. We should not treat this organization's conclusion as equivalent to an independent UN or Amnesty determination. It is an Israeli civil society investigation whose strongest systematic conclusions need external auditing. Interestingly, reporting on the report notes that even this investigation lacked direct evidence of orders from Hamas leadership. Finkelstein's attack on Sandberg's motives is weak. Sandberg is highly educated. She understands evidence. Her documentary nevertheless contains weak evidence. Therefore, this cannot simply be innocent error. Zionist commitment caused her to subordinate facts to, quote, the cause. That obviously does not follow. Her Harvard credentials make it reasonable to expect intellectual sophistication. They do not allow us to infer her private epistemic state. The possibilities aren't merely dupe or liar. That's another thing, like black and white thinking, this or that reasoning in Norm Finkelstein and seemingly accepted by Hasan Piker is a real problem here. She could sincerely assign more weight to witness testimony than Finkelstein does, accept the patent standard, view corroborative, I hate that word, corroborative, I don't know why I have a problem with that, patterns as compelling, rely on evidence unavailable publicly, make confirmation biased arguments, trust flawed intermediaries, or simply produce an advocacy documentary using a lower evidentiary standard than an international criminal investigation. Some of those would obviously still merit criticism, but they aren't the same as knowing fabrication. So there's a false dichotomy and completely unsupported motive attribution. His claim that Sandberg's movie galvanized American support is also too confident. The film was certainly promoted politically and screened in elite venues, including the White House. Finkelstein, therefore, has a reasonable basis for arguing that it functioned as political advocacy, but saying it galvanized American support for the Gaza war / genocide makes a causal claim. To establish that empirically, we'd need something like public opinion changes, experiments, longitudinal media effect, or identifiable policy decisions attributable to exposure to this specific documentary. Finkelstein doesn't supply that. So political advocacy / influence is supported, but specific causal claim about galvanizing American support, unsupported. I mean, is this report going to be comparable to the Dave Farina propaganda hit piece? We shall see. Oh, there's more here. I'm going to adjudicate these two more propositions. And where are we at for time on this stream? Yeah, we're at that 3-hour mark. So we'll be well over that by the time we're done with this. Okay. Boom. So Hasan mentioned the rape charges that were dropped. So let's look at this. On July 5th, 2024, a Palestinian detainee, and I know we've been through this, but it's important for this record. A Palestinian detainee at the Sid Taiman military detention facility was allegedly subjected to an extremely violent assault by members of an Israeli reserve unit known as Force 100. The subsequent Israeli indictment alleged that while the detainee was shackled and blindfolded, soldiers kicked him, stomped on him, beat him with objects, dragged him, and used a taser on him. It further alleged that one defendant stabbed him in the buttock with a sharp object close to the anus, producing an internal rectal tear. He suffered 7 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and serious rectal injury requiring surgery. The sexual dimension was therefore not invented. The original July 2024 investigation was widely described as concerning suspected sexual assault or rape, and Israeli television later broadcast surveillance footage from the incident. The footage shows soldiers surrounding the detainee with riot shields, obscuring much of what happens. The man's subsequent medical condition was independently documented. Then came, quote, pro-rape riot. On July 29th, 2024, military police arrived at Sid Taiman and detained 9 reservists. A 10th suspect was arrested later. Far-right politicians and activists descended on the facility. Protesters broke through the perimeter and entered Sid Taiman. Later that day, hundreds went to Beit Lid, where the suspects were being held and where the military court system is based. Dozens breached that base as well and clashed with military personnel. This wasn't merely a social media story. The IDF itself now describes the events in its official 2026 account. The investigation triggered a series of protests, some violent, including breaching into 2 military bases. And this involved people with governmental authority. Among those entering Sid Taiman were Heritage Minister Amishay Eliyahu, Religious Zionism MK Zvi Sukkot, and Likud MK Nissim Vitiri. Is, quote, pro-rape a fair description? It is rhetorical rather than a neutral factual labor. So this idea that Israel held a, quote, pro-rape riot as though that were the official purpose accepted by every participant. We should not say that. But there is unusually strong factual support for Hasan's characterization here. The protests arose specifically because soldiers were being detained in connection with an alleged assault involving severe rectal injuries / sexual abuse. Politicians denounced the detention and defended the soldiers. Most strikingly, during the political controversy, Arab Israeli MK Ahmad Tibi challenged Likud MK Hanak Milwitsky about whether inserting an object into a prisoner's rectum was legitimate. Milwitsky answered, yes, if he is a Nukba, everything is legitimate. Yikes. CBS independently reported the exchange. That is very important. It means that this is not merely guilt by association. At least one governing party legislator explicitly defended the permissibility of the alleged type of sexualized violence. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir also denounced the arrests and referred to the reservists as heroes. So, quote, the pro-rape riots, qualified but rhetorically loaded, but substantially grounded. A maximally precise version would be far-right Israeli protesters joined the government. Politicians stormed 2 military bases in support of soldiers detained over an alleged sexual assault of a Palestinian prisoner. At least one Likud lawmaker explicitly defended the legitimacy of the alleged rectal abuse. This is extremely well supported. And the January 6th comparison, this wasn't invented by Hasan either. In August 2024, Vox literally ran the headline, Israel's January 6th moment. The analogy was based on people associated with the governing political right physically breaching state military institutions in an attempt to interfere with legal proceedings against ideological allies. There are 2 obvious differences. January 6th involved an attempt to disrupt certification of the presidential election and transfer of power. Sid Taiman and Beit Lid involved interference with military arrests and judicial proceedings. So saying the events were literally equivalent would be wrong, but as an analogy concerning politically motivated mobs breaching government facilities to interfere with lawful state processes, quote, Israel's January 6th is defensible. In fact, the IDF chief condemned the breaches as extraordinarily serious, and Israeli reporting described the episode as approaching anarchy. Now, the crucial part here. Quote, the rape charges were dropped. 5 soldiers were formally indicted on February 19th, 2025. However, the actual criminal counts were aggravated abuse, assault, and causing serious bodily injury, not a separate statutory charge labeled, quote, rape. The indictment nevertheless contained the allegation that a sharp object was driven into the detainee's buttock near his anus, causing an internal rectal tear. So, quote, they were charged with grape would be technically inaccurate. Quote, they were investigated for grape or sexual assault. That would be accurate. Quote, they were criminally charged over the incident involving the alleged rectal assault would be accurate. Then on March 12, 2026, Israel's new military advocate general withdrew the entire indictment against the 5 soldiers. Therefore, Hasan's shorthand, quote, the rape charges were dropped, captures the broad story, but collapses an important legal distinction. We could rate this qualified, technically misleading, rather than false. Why were the charges dropped? This is where the story becomes considerably more complicated. The IDF's own 9-page decision is unusually revealing. It did not conclude that the assault was fabricated or that the soldiers were proven innocent. The new military advocate general said the evidence presented a severe and disturbing picture, but concluded that there were major obstacles to establishing the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Among the reasons, the video is not conclusive. The soldiers positioned shields around themselves, obscuring most of the alleged assault. The military concluded that the video by itself could not unequivocally distinguish criminal violence from the force the defense said was used during a search. The detainee reportedly gave differing accounts concerning aspects of how his injuries occurred. The medical evidence was serious, but medical injuries alone could not conclusively establish which defendant committed which act. The original evidentiary package consisted principally of the detainee's testimony, surveillance footage, and medical documentation. The complainant had been returned to Gaza in October 2025 as part of a hostage detainee exchange. Prosecutors therefore could no longer be confident that they could produce him for testimony and defense cross-examination. The MAG considered this a major fair trial problem. There was an extraordinary prosecutorial misconduct leak scandal. Former military advocate general Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi admitted authorizing the leak of evidence during the ongoing investigation. Other questions arose about the subsequent investigation into that leak. A senior investigator also publicly discussed evidence while the criminal proceedings were still pending. The new MAG concluded that these circumstances strengthened an, quote, abusive process defense and impaired the defendant's right to a fair trial. These factors collectively caused the prosecution to withdraw the case. Therefore, quote, charges dropped equals rape allegation disproved would be false. This distinction matters enormously. The official Israeli decision does not say that the detainee wasn't abused, that the rectal injuries were fabricated, or that the soldiers were exonerated on the facts. Instead, it effectively says serious evidence existed, the factual picture remained disputed, subsequent evidentiary and prosecutorial problems made a criminal conviction sufficiently doubtful, unfair to pursue. The IDF explicitly acknowledged both sides. The evidence depicted something severe and disturbing, while also saying it did not reach the certainty required for continued criminal prosecution. This is very different from a judicial finding of innocence. There's another extraordinary wrinkle. As of July 2026, the Times of Israel reported that no indictments had been brought against the people who breached the military bases during the July 2024 riots. So you end up with this remarkable sequence. July 2024, soldiers arrested over alleged extreme abuse, sexual assault. Far-right politicians and activists storm military bases. February 2025, 5 soldiers formally indicted for aggravated abuse and serious bodily injury. 2025, the military prosecutor who authorized release of evidence becomes embroiled in her own criminal investigation and resigns. March 2026, prosecution of the 5 soldiers is terminated because of evidentiary and fair trial problems. July 2026, no indictments reportedly brought against the people who stormed the bases. This should have been tried. This should have been tried, and the trial made public. It has international implications. It has major implications about fairness of how detainees, hostages are treated or ought be treated. Even if the judgment was made that this is a very weak trial, it still should have been adjudicated and tried, and the findings made public. I think that would have been what justice calls for in this situation. It bothers me that these soldiers that were involved in this horrifying event of abuse aren't even are not being prosecuted. They should be prosecuted, and if the so-called fair trial problems and evidence issues end up having the trial thrown out, so long as it's fairly adjudicated, then fine. But in my opinion, this should be prosecuted, cases like this. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being with me here late tonight. We're finding a lot of problems here. So the substantive point Hasan is making is much stronger than the phrase, quote, grape charges were dropped, makes it sound. The best correction isn't, quote, Hasan made this up. It is, Hasan is describing a very real and extraordinary episode, but he should distinguish an accusation of grape sexual assault from the actual criminal counts that were ultimately filed and withdrawn. And the phrase, quote, pro grape January 6th is polemical, but it has a surprisingly substantial factual foundation, especially because an actual Likud legislator explicitly said that the kind of rectal abuse being discussed was legitimate. So yeah, my ethical opinion on this, the good thing to do, the righteous thing to do, is to prosecute this, try this case, even if it's incredibly weak, even if it costs public funds, money, whatever it takes for full transparency on this case, given the context of the war and everything that's going on. There's a lot of stupidity at play in how people involved in this case conducted themselves, including the rioting and all of this garbage. There was also a claim by Hasan saying that the USA corporate media is completely complicit in Israel actions. Obviously the literal reading is false. So no, it's not true that the U.S. corporate media is completely complicit in Israel actions. So the underlying claim of substantial systematic pro-Israel bias. There is some support there. The problem is primarily the words completely and complicit. So there is serious evidence that important U.S. mainstream outlets have systematically framed Gaza in ways more favorable to Israeli narratives. A quantitative analysis of more than 1,000 articles from the New York Times, Washington Post, and LA Times during the first 6 weeks found a disproportionate emphasis on Israeli deaths, substantially more emotive terminology for Israeli victims, and other asymmetries disadvantaging Palestinian victims. Harvard's Neiman Journalism Lab highlighted these findings. Even larger 2025-2026 study analyzed more than 14,000 articles from CNN, the New York Times, BBC, and Al Jazeera English during the first year. It found 3 systematic patterns in the Western outlets. Israelis were considerably more likely to be presented as identifiable individual victims. October 7th was repeatedly invoked in ways that balanced Israeli suffering against much greater contemporaneous Palestinian casualties, and Palestinian casualty numbers were subjected to more credibility questioning language. That's significant empirical evidence. However, this study is currently an Arixiv preprint, not something we should treat as settled peer-reviewed consensus. The evidence from inside CNN is particularly striking. In 2024, The Guardian interviewed 6 CNN staffers and reviewed more than a dozen internal memos and emails. Employees alleged an institutional pro-Israel bias. Internal guidance required continuous reminders that the October 7th was the, quote, immediate cause of the conflict, required special handling of Gaza Health Ministry casualty figures, severely restricted Hamas material, and subjected Israel-Palestine material to additional Jerusalem Bureau review. Some CNN employees described the result as, quote, journalistic malpractice. CNN explicitly rejected the allegation that it applied different standards to Israeli officials. So we can take Hasan's claim seriously in a narrower sense, like major U.S. corporate media exhibited substantial systemic pro-Israel biases in its governance of Gaza. That formulation has strong evidentiary support, but completely complicit in Israel's actions goes much further. Why completely fails? CNN itself has published investigations highly critical of Israeli conduct. One lengthy CNN investigation reconstructed an incident using 7 survivors, videos, satellite imagery, and forensic ballistics experts, and concluded that civilians had died amid what it characterized as intense and indiscriminate Israeli military fire, raising serious questions about the IDF's explanation. The Washington Post conducted its own visual munitions investigations of the May 2024 Rafah strike, consulting 4 weapons experts and identifying fragments of a U.S.-made GBU-39 bomb used in the Israeli strike that killed dozens of Palestinians. That's exactly the sort of adversarial journalism one would not expect from a media system that was completely functioning as an accomplice to Israel. Even the CNN employees criticizing their own organization acknowledged that CNN correspondents produced thorough and hard-hitting reporting on Palestinian suffering and Israeli conduct. Their complaint was partly that such work received insufficient prominence, especially on CNN's U.S. feed. So the empirical record looks more like institutional bias, plus uneven sourcing, plus asymmetrical framing, plus serious journalistic failures, plus genuinely adversarial reporting occurring simultaneously. That isn't complete complicity. Complicit is an additional problem. Bias and complicity are not interchangeable concepts. To demonstrate bias, we can measure language, sourcing, prominence, humanization, story selection, casualty framing, and corrections. To demonstrate complicity, I don't know why I'm doing that with the word, in Israel's actions. To demonstrate complicity in Israel's actions, however, Hasan needs something like a causal or intentional proposition. Media behavior material facilitated Israeli conduct, political support for that conduct, or suppression of opposition to it. The hypothesis is plausible in some respects. Media framing can affect public opinion and elite political behavior. But moving from CNN disproportionately trusted Israeli sources to CNN was complicit in Israel's military actions is an additional normative and causal inference. No study that seems to be available establishes anything remotely as comprehensive as all major U.S. corporate media to knowingly or functionally enabled Israel's conduct to such an extent that the institutions can collectively be called completely complicit. There is also a denominator problem. Quote, U.S. corporate media could include CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, Bloomberg, Reuters, U.S. operation, AP, various magazines, local television networks, hundreds of newspapers, etc. These organizations did not behave identically, and within individual institutions, reporters, editors, opinion writers, and executives often behave differently. The CNN evidence actually demonstrates this internal oh, that's weird. Oh, just a error shoving things together. The CNN evidence actually demonstrates things like journalists were fighting management over coverage and producing investigations critical of Israel. That alone makes, quote, completely an extremely difficult universal to defend. All right, I wanted to adjudicate those. I think there was one. Oh, yeah. Hasan described these guards as concentration camp guards. Hello, everyone. Still hanging in there? I'm going to adjudicate this last statement, this concentration camp statement by Hasan. And then I think that's going to be it for tonight. Thanks, honey. I have the best wife in the world. And not only because she just brought me a chocolate bar, which I'm not going to eat because I still have some more reading to do. And you guys would have to hear my gargled chocolate throat. Gargled chocolate throat. That could be a erotic novel. So Hasan framed it as 6 of the Israeli occupation forces concentration camp guards at SDE, which I think is Timon, and then saying they were prosecuted for raping Palestinian prisoners. Okay. We already went through the verdict on concentration. Concentration camp has a broader historical meaning than Nazi extermination camp, but it is also not the neutral or generally accepted name for Sid Timon. In calling the individual soldiers concentration camp guards carries an obvious Nazi era association that needs qualification. I hear the Nazi rhetoric, the comparison of like what's happened in Gaza to Nazi Germany. I think this all in all is a complete category error. If when the ICJ eventually investigates certain things relating to genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, these kinds of things, and all of this evidence, which we had millions of pieces of evidence, by the way, demonstrating intent with regards to Nazi Germany. But if we unveil a whole pile of evidence that there was, Nazi-like intent to commit genocide, then I will stand corrected on this. But to me, at where things are at this stage, what's been demonstrated thus far, these are not, I think it's a category error to compare, the hunting of Hamas in Gaza. And I am somewhat convinced that this has been done by the IDF and Israel in a reckless way. It's just it trying to make a proportionality argument, which is going to come up in the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. Proportionality is going to come up, and I think being able to justify the particular operations, the IDF's and Israel's going to be able to justify things through a particular lens. But when you look at the big picture, which is going to be significant to the ICJ when they're looking at the big picture of proportionality, it looks drastically out of proportion to me. But that doesn't mean that there is necessarily intent to commit genocide. But the difference, I think it just shows a complete historical ignorance. The difference between, hunting Hamas, having, I would still call it as mass civilian casualties in Gaza. And then there are obviously some questions about particular instances of war crimes that will be adjudicated. That comparing that to the industrialized mass killing of Jews in Nazi Germany, and not just Jews, gypsies, others in Nazi Germany, in that industrialized, planned way of carting Jews off. Well, to begin with, lining up Jews in communities in, with pre-dug mass graves, and get them all to take off their jewelry, everything, and strip naked, stand in front of the holes, and get shot in the back of the head by Nazi soldiers, guards, mass murder at that scale. And that's just obviously the beginning. And then eventually gas trucks are introduced. And then there's some thinking, well, how do we ramp this up? And then the death camps, with the use of Zyklon B gas and everything else, starts getting implemented at mass scale, mass extermination scale. To compare that to what's the evidentiary case at the moment to what happened in Gaza, I think just is purely a drastic category error. And that's not to say that means that the measure of the of even a single life of a civilian lost, of an innocent child lost in Gaza, is somehow less important than the life of, a Jewish child or a Jewish person that lost their life in Treblinka. It's not to say that one is more worthy or worthy of my moral consideration than the other. It's not that at all. It's just not a comparable scenario in my understanding of World War II history, the history of the Holocaust, and looking and studying of what's been going on in Gaza. Not comparable, in my opinion. Someone said, Lost in Space says, I don't know what really happened in Nazi Germany. Did they prove any more intent than wanting to ethnically cleanse Jews to pushing them? Yes, there are millions upon millions of pieces of evidence demonstrating genocidal intent, crimes against humanity, all kinds of other war crimes. Yeah. The evidence is available. You can go study it. So the question here is, and it is true that concentration camp has many different historical usages and understandings. But it would be without engaging in the parties involved and the history involved with regards to the parties involved in Gaza and in Israel, to say that like invoking the concentration camp term just is to mean like some like generalized concept of a concentration camp and how that won't be taken to mean something related to Nazi Germany. I think that would be reckless to use that term and to think that people won't reasonably connect what you're saying to the concentration camps and death camps of World War II. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum explains that the term predates Nazi Germany and historically refers to detention camps where people are confined under harsh conditions and outside ordinary legal processes. Nazi concentration camps were a particularly extreme historical manifestation. Quote, concentration camp does not inherently mean, quote, death camp. That's why I use that distinction. Sid Timon has several characteristics that overlap with the broader historical concept. It is a military detention camp. Large numbers of Palestinians from Gaza have been detained there. Many Palestinian detainees have been held without ordinary criminal charges or trials. Amnesty documented prolonged incommunicado detention, blindfolding, and shackling, and allegations of torture and other ill treatment. OHCHR documented allegations of torture, sexual violence, and rape in Israeli detention, and specifically referred to Sid Taiman as a detention camp. Israeli human rights, even that term, like detention camp, doesn't carry the weight of concentration camp, in my view. Detention camp, I don't even think of Nazi Germany when I think of detention camp. Concentration camp, right there. Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem described the wider Israeli detention system after October 7th as a, quote, network of torture camps based on testimony from 55 released Palestinians, almost all of whom it says were released without charges. Those facts make a broad historical concentration camp analogy intellectually defensible, but reputable institutions generally don't call Sid Taiman a concentration camp. This matters. The IDF calls it the Sid Taiman Detention Facility. Amnesty variously calls it a military prison, military detention camp, or military detention center. OHCHR calls it a detention camp. B'Tselem uses the extremely severe term torture camp, but that still isn't the same classification as concentration camp. By the way, everyone, I'll be done this reading in a little bit. If you want to send a super chat my way, and I'll respond to any of your questions or comments, or adjudicate something before I end the episode, please feel free to send that to me now, just so we're not sending it just at the second where I'm about to close down. OHCHR calls it a detention camp. B'Tselem uses the extremely severe torture camp, but that still isn't the same classification as concentration camp. So Hasan is making an interpretive historical classification, not repeating an established institutional designation. Sid Taiman can plausibly be characterized as a concentration camp under some broad historical definitions because it involved mass military detention of a targeted civilian population outside ordinary criminal process. However, concentration camp is not the standard neutral designation used by the UN, Amnesty, the IDF, or most mainstream reporting. Guards is also imprecise. The guards element actually also just adds to that, because we talk through history about concentration camp guards in Nazi Germany, death camp guards. So guards is also imprecise by Hasan. This gets overlooked. The 5 defendants in the famous July 2024 sexual abuse case were not described by the IDF simply as 6 prison guards. The Israeli military identified them as 5 reserve soldiers belonging to Force 100, an intervention force operating at Sid Taiman. They were indicted. Okay, we went through their indictments and everything already. Calling them guards isn't wildly misleading. They were soldiers operating inside the detention facility and exercising custody control over detainees, but, quote, Force 100 reservists or members of a detention facility intervention unit is substantially more precise. Yeah, I just think, like, in the zeitgeist, concentration camp guards means something with a swastika on it. Hasan's number 6 appears just to be wrong. So for the incident that generated the July 29, 2024 riots, 9 soldiers were initially arrested, not 6. and prosecuted for raping Palestinian prisoners compounds the problem. The actual central case concerned one particular Palestinian detainee, not Palestinian prisoners, plural. And although the alleged conduct had a clear sexual assault dimension and involved severe rectal injury, the 5 men were formally charged with aggravated abuse and causing serious bodily harm under aggravated circumstances rather than a standalone rape charge. I wish that would have been adjudicated. I really think that would have been the right thing to do. Someone said, Penguin, you should use some Hebrew pronunciation app because you're massacring these names. Yeah, I understand how that could bother people, but that's not what this is about. It's not about me getting the Hebrew correct. This is about fact checking the data, and the data report will have the words in it correctly. But yeah, I'm not going to spend time on a pronunciation app just to get the pronunciation right. I don't see that as a valuable use of the fact checking time. But thanks everyone for being with me. I really appreciate it. We didn't get very far in the video. I mean, this might be another, like, at the end of the day, it's probably going to be 7 or 8 episodes. But I really, really do appreciate you guys being here with me. Make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you share these streams. I think it's important that we get good, solid fact checking out there in the culture. I think, for people who create content like Hasan and Finkelstein, they should really, I want them to think twice before spreading misinformation, just like anybody else. I want people to be thinking twice to get this stuff right before they signal this kind of information out to their audiences. So, that's what it's all about. And at the end of the day, this is because moving in the direction towards having a higher resolution picture of what's actually going on in reality inevitably moves us in the direction of higher levels of health. How are we going to apply our best sciences, our mastery of human biological health? How are we going to maximize physical, mental, and social health? We can't get a grasp on the facts, the things that are actually going on in reality. So I really do care about that. Thank you so much for the super chat, Fell Runner. I really appreciate that. Last minute thanks for all your hard work. I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. If you're not following me on X, make sure you follow me on X. Make sure you join us on Discord. I will also give you guys X post. And I will see you guys tomorrow again around the same time. Be here or be triangle. Good night. Oh, of course. Please make sure you're out there maximizing well-being, physical, mental, and social health for yourself and those around you.